Welcome to McCaffrey Clinic Couch, where beauty, pain, aesthetics, business and industry truth all collide. In today's podcast episode, I'm going to be discussing the Scottish Aesthetics Regulations. This is a subject that I am extremely passionate about and I've been actively involved in over the past few years, especially since 2019-2020. So let's get into the nitty-gritties. So history-wise, the aesthetics industry, the beauty industry, for 20-25 years has been very much self-regulated, and I do mean self-regulated. So when we started in the industry 20 plus years ago, there were no routes to do dermal fillers, botulinum toxin, PRP, chemical peels. So there were CPD courses developed, continuous professional development, and those were the only recognised pathway for practitioners to be able to go out there and practice. Now, over the years, it's become a booming industry with anybody and everybody booking on courses and going off to do them. The problem is this led to a culture of, in some ways, a cowboy industry, because we were seeing a lot of practitioners with no real experience who had done a 1-2 day course, some even doing 3-5 day course, and where they would learn say 6-7 treatments in 3 to 5 days, and then 4 months later they would do an online train the trainers course and start teaching it. And the industry got bigger and bigger to a point where there was no containing it. It became dangerous in many respects, not just from a practitioner's point of view, but what the trainers or some of these trainers out there were doing. And there was a push for the past, I'd say 10 years, to actually get it regulated, not just the UK, but in the devolved nations, Scotland, England, Northern Ireland, Wales. And that push just seemed to be pushing against a brick wall. We never really seemed to be getting anywhere. And then in 2020, the English government and the Scottish government released their first Scottish and English public consultation. Now, that consultation was to do with what treatments should be licensed, which treatments should not be done by non-healthcare professionals, in other words, non-medics. We try and stay away from the term non-medics because it's used in a very derogatory way. It's used against practitioners who don't have a nursing qualification or a medic's qualification, and it's used to talk about them in a derogatory way, and in a lot of cases that's very unfair. But I'll get on to that further into the podcast. Now, both consultations discuss groupings, what treatment should be in which. So in England it was called the green, amber, red categories. In Scotland it was called 1, 2 and 3 groupings. So in group 1 and group green for England, those treatments would be things like superficial microneedling, superficial chemical peels, radio frequency and so on, and that would come under licensing with your local authority. Anything that fell into group 2 or the amber category, they would be looking at, especially in Scotland, that going under HIS, Healthcare Improvement Scotland, which would mean registration and so on. And it was also put in the consultation that they would be looking at having a prescriber on premises within Scotland at all times for group 2. Group 3, quite simply, means no one except for a doctor, GP, surgeon, etc. could do the more dangerous treatments such as butt filler, breast filler, labia, and so on. So those all went into the red category. England was supposed to release their second consultation, which was to do with further regulations, training, qualifications, and so on. That still hasn't happened, and we're now in 2026. That was due to various reasons, including a general election, so it got put on hold and on the back burner. In Scotland, our second consultation did happen, and then we started looking at the regulations being pushed forward, and the groupings were basically superficial peels, superficial microneedling, radio frequency, things like that. They were put into group 1, which will be licensing. Group 2 was dermal fillers, botulinum toxin, medium depth peels, and so on. That was all in group 2, and that will come under HIS registration, which will, as it currently stands, require you to have a prescriber on site when you are doing any treatments. So that was then debated and heard in Scottish Parliament and voted on, and it was agreed that it would go through as is. And then just before our election in March, it was to go through royal assent. So during the election process, Scottish Parliament was shut down, and the bill had passed through Scottish Parliament, and then it took about 8 weeks approximately for it to receive royal assent. So once it goes to royal assent and is passed, it becomes law. So we then move on to the fact that the Scotland and Scottish practitioners now have a legal framework to work from. The regulations are now set, and we're entering into the second phase, which is secondary legislation and how they're going to ensure that the licensing HIS, how that's going to work, how that's going to be enforced leading up to the 6th of September 2027. So all practitioners in Scotland do have until September the 6th, 2027 to become compliant, either with licensing or with HIS registration. Now, it's important to make a few distinctions here. The HIS registration, there seems to be a lot of confusion still with practitioners, especially on Facebook groups. It has always been the fact that a nurse or a medic, i.e. a GP, and it's important to note here that a nurse, contrary to what you might see on nurses' Facebook and social media pages, they are not medics. Technically, they are a healthcare provider. So any nurse, GP, doctor, dentist, and so on, they have always had to be HIS registered since 2015, 2016, and they cannot get away from that. So they have to be HIS registered. And last year, HIS made it very clear that any nurse or medic, GP, doctor, etc., could not work from a salon that wasn't HIS registered. That, in effect, means that a prescriber cannot work from a non-healthcare practitioner's salon or clinic unless they are HIS registered. So I am seeing a lot of people on Facebook saying, well, no, we can work, they can work from non-HIS registered premises because it's not being enforced until next year. That's not correct. A nurse or a medic has been told they are only allowed to work from HIS registered premises. This means that if you are a non-medic, i.e. a non-healthcare practitioner, you do not have any medical background at all, then you will either have to send your clients to the prescriber's HIS registered clinic, and then they come back to you, or you are going to have your clinical salon HIS registered. There is no ifs or buts. You cannot wait until next year. That has to be current practice. So if you are currently of the belief that you have until next year to become compliant, prescription only medications, that's not actually the case, because a nurse and medic, i.e. a GP, dentist, they have always been required to work from HIS registered premises. There was a slight grey area where they could go into non-HIS registered premises and do prescriptions face to face, but that has changed. HIS did state in emails to all its members that they are not allowed to work from non-HIS registered premises. I hope that clarifies that for you. So as a non-healthcare practitioner, a non-medic doing group 2 treatments such as dermal fillers, botulinum toxin and so on, you have until September 2027 to be compliant so that you aren't breaking the laws. Because remember, if you get caught breaking the law, you will face anywhere up to a £20,000 fine. So you do have that year or so, year and a half, to get compliant with the regulations. But you don't when it comes to botulinum toxin or a prescription only medication, because those have to be done by prescription, by a prescriber, face to face. Which means you either get your salon or clinic HIS registered, or you send your clients to the prescriber in their HIS registered premises, and then the client comes back to you and you do the treatment. Because from now till September 2027, you do not need to have a prescriber in your premises to do the treatment. It's just your prescriber can't operate from your premises because they're not HIS registered. So as it stands at the moment, we now are currently moving into what we term secondary legislation within Scotland. Now, what that means is the Scottish Government and civil servants are working their way through the logistics of the regulations for aesthetics and beauty, how it's going to work for licensing across all the different local authorities, what they're going to need, what that license is going to look like. It's going to be similar to the tattoo and piercing license, but it's going to have different aspects to it to take account of the type of industry that it is. And then you've got HIS, how that's going to work. So all of the nitty gritty for these things needs to be worked out over the coming months to ensure that regulations run smoothly when it comes to September 2027. So you then also have to start looking, or they're going to start looking at the training and qualifications. And this is a big one because the industry has no regulations when it comes to training and qualifications. So at this past 20 years, as I say, we've all been doing CPD, but then about 7 odd years ago, qualifications level 4, 5 and 7 came out in aesthetics, which were Ofqual regulated, and that gave people a benchmark to work from, because qualifications leave a paperwork trail. So you can prove categorically what you've learnt, how many hours you spent learning it, what you learnt, whether it was anatomy, physiology, pathology, whether it was about products and product interaction, and so on. So you've got all those modules and it can be proven what you've learnt. Whereas with CPD, there is no paper trail. Unless, of course, you're doing it with somebody like myself, who is an actual qualification centre, does teach CPD. So our CPD courses, and our qualifications, all the theory is done online. Our CPD theory is near enough the same as doing a qualification. So we have a paper trail even with a CPD. But most CPD courses, you'll get given access to a short couple of pages on a video online and shown this is what you do, this is the product, and that's it. And then you go along and do your day's practical. So there is no paper trail, and that has to change. That has to change really quickly. So we have certain qualifications already there, but what we need now is for it to be in a legal framework that you have to have this amount of training, this level of training, with this amount of experience and provable before you can practice. And that's what the Scottish Government will be looking at over the next few months. What should that training and qualification framework will look like? How do you have recognised prior learning? Again, recognised prior learning can be very dodgy, shall we say, because you can say, yes, practitioners have spent thousands doing CPD courses, but what we've found is a lot of practitioners who have done CPD courses and spent a lot of money are then going on to do their level 5, say, for example, but they don't know anything. They don't have that core knowledge that you should have at level 3, 4 to be able to do their level 5. And so they're struggling, and they're struggling big time. And that's because CPD courses don't have the content, they don't have the knowledge and the competency there, and there's certainly no proof that you've got that knowledge and competency. So, all of this will be looked at over the next few months. And I, the other day, had a meeting with the Scottish Government about how the secondary legislation is going to work moving forward, what stage they're at with it, how we can contribute, because we have an organisation now called the NMAC, the Non-Medical Aesthetics Council, and it is there to support all non-healthcare practitioners within the industry across the UK and to be their voice. So we've been involved in these discussions with ScotGov since 2020, 2021. And moving forward, we will be a strong voice for what will be looked at under secondary legislation. And that is very, very important. So I hope that when you listen to this podcast, that you understand, yes, the regulations are law. They did come in under royal assent, so they're now legally enshrined in law. But also that, yes, you, as non-healthcare practitioners, everybody, including nurses and that who aren't already registered, you all have until September 2027 to be compliant. What you don't have is the time to wait, and that has never been the case. If you are a nurse or a medic and you are doing aesthetics, you've always been required to be Healthcare Improvement Scotland registered. And last year, they released information and an email to all their members that they were not allowed to work from non-registered clinics and salons. This means, as I've said throughout this podcast, you can do your Botox and your POM treatments from your clinic, but until September 2027, but you cannot have the prescriber come to your premises, which means your clients have to go to a HIS registered premises. So I hope that has cleared up a lot of misinformation that is bouncing around on the internet, especially on social media, Facebook groups. I would also ask that if you've enjoyed today's podcast and found it useful, please subscribe, leave a review, leave your comments below. Tell me what you think. Tell me how you think secondary legislation in Scotland should work. And if you're in England and you're wondering what's happening in England, nothing at the moment, but we will keep you up to date on that. So remember, drop us a comment, subscribe, leave a review, and we will see you on our next podcast.